A few days ago, and I think all the council members have looked through it. It's a relatively complicated study. I think that's a fair thing to say. And with that being said, I think I probably should open us up to Jennifer and explain the basis of it and where you think we need to go from here.
Sure. I'm going to walk through essentially the same information that's presented in the Evergreen report, but in a much shorter, condensed version for you. Of course, if we've got specific questions from any of you about particular sections of the report, we can certainly walk through that, and feel free to interrupt me. Just want to let you know as well that as we're always filming the council meetings and it's running live today, we're also going to be utilizing this work session video as our means of educating staff and employees about the results of the study. Of course, they can be watching it live right now, but it'll be available on YouTube, and we'll have a web page on the intranet set up this afternoon with the full copy of the report, as well as the video today, just to let you know that. Okay, so we're gonna walk through a quick overview, just a reminder for you all, that last year in the budget, you all requested that we conduct a compensation study externally. And so we've done that. Back in March, you approved Evergreen Solutions as the vendor for this particular project. And Evergreen got started with the county back in April. They've conducted several on-site visits. They started out with some directors, key managers, to just discuss what some of their general challenges were in terms of attracting and retaining employees. And they also conducted some orientation sessions with employees, so employees were educated on the purpose of the study, how the study would be conducted, and then their role in helping provide information that's critical in the study. We had over 150 employees attend those orientation sessions, and we held those throughout the county at various times to be convenient for various schedules. And then Evergreen conducted 31 focus group meetings and interviews with supervisors, managers, and groups of employees. And then finally, back in May, all employees were provided a job assessment tool, which we'll discuss a little bit further, and completed those in the month of May and June. So the analysis by Evergreen is really looking at two major components: our compensation structure and our classification system. So that compensation structure is really focused on how is the pay plan laid out, how many pay grades do we have, how large those pay grades are, so what's that range look like, how much of a jump as you're moving down the pay scale is there from the midpoint of one pay grade to the next. That's what is referred to as midpoint progression, and you've seen that throughout the Evergreen report. And then that compensation structure is also what's looking at how do we compare to our peers. In terms of classification, another important piece of the overall county compensation structure, we look at the number of classification titles that we have, the hierarchy of those compensation titles, how we have reporting relationships between those various employees, and what the overall organization is of the department or the county as a whole, and then looking at employees' duties and responsibilities. So the job assessment tool was one of the key components of the study. It was an online form that was asked to be completed by every employee. We had over 83% participation, and that form is designed to gather data about what it is that employee does every single day, what their responsibilities are, what they spend their time on. And then 75% of those completed JATs were completely reviewed by their supervisor. And so, an employee is providing you feedback about the type of work that they do, and Evergreen kind of classifies that then into a couple of major categories related to leadership, the working conditions, the complexity of the work, their decision-making role, so whether it's decision-making that is done exclusively by the employee, decisions that can be made and need to be reviewed by supervisors, what level of authority do you have, and then relationship to those other levels of work. After each employee completed that job assessment tool, like I said, supervisors reviewed those, but we also had human resources provide a review of each of those job assessment tools by pay classification, and those were reviewed by Evergreen. And then those job assessment tools, and it really helps produce what you saw throughout some of the explanation of the report, a numerical score to try and help them slot employees into the various pay grades by relationship to other employees. And they combine that with the market survey data, and that's going to what is going to give us that market value, and then provide us the ability to update job descriptions. So on a regular basis, HR asks supervisors and directors to update job descriptions. Sometimes we do a better job than that of others, especially when we have openings. That's when you get the most updating of a job description, when they're really going out and looking to fill that again, versus having an incumbent in that position. We don't always do a great job of making sure to update that those duties have changed. And that's where you see some things in terms of reclassifications reclassifications for particular groups of employees throughout county government. So to identify the market compensation, Evergreen is really going to be focusing on the market midpoint. You'll see throughout the report that they're talking about market minimums and market maximums, but our real focus is on that midpoint. And the midpoint, as a brief reminder, is what the market is compensating for an employee who is fully up to speed, fully capable of performing their job. Not what it would be to hire a new employee who's never done the particular job for this particular organization before, but after you've had them either on board for a few months or maybe a year, depending on what type of level of work it is, it's once they're proficient at their job, what is the market paying for that type of employee? And then we're also focusing on, based upon that market midpoint, then we're able to build out the rest of that pay range. So again, that's what helps drive then those minimums and maximums. And we don't start with the minimum and build up, we start with that midpoint and build out. So the market survey that Evergreen conducted is really the same process that HR would use if we were doing it internally. You'll recall last year, as part of the budget process, we had a conversation about whether or not a regular market survey each year is something that we could be doing internally. I think there was conversation at the time that that's what St. Peter's does, for instance, with a certain group of their employees on an annual basis. I think they study about a third of their positions or something every single year. And so that process is always going to be the same. And want to kind of point that out again, because we can still revisit how do we keep these types of market studies up to date moving forward in the future, and that there's nothing really special about what these companies and consultants do for us other than the ability to put more out there all in one period of time than we could internally. So we had 89 representative classifications included as part of the market survey. So we have over 380 job classifications. You can't send 380 job classifications to the city of St. Peter's and expect them to read all 380 and identify whether they have any positions comparable to those. You've got to be able to use a representative group of classifications. And so we had 89 that were included as part of the market survey. Some of those were particular positions identified by Human Resources as ones that we've had trouble in the past either filling or retaining employees in, or that we have a lot of turnover in. And then others were just randomly selected by Evergreen so that we had a representative sample across all pay grades. We sent those surveys to 32 peer organizations, and we had 15 who responded to some extent to those 89 classifications, and those are listed there for you. So just as a refresher, our current pay plan, we have pay grades 1 through 19 today. I've shown 5 through 19. Those are the only ones that have full-time employees within them. 1 through 4 are usually used solely for intermittent employment. So that's our current pay structure. And second thing that was in your packet, because I know that was also small, or the last single sheet separate from the packet, is the current pay chart and the recommended pay chart, so that you've got those in a little bit larger font size that you can hopefully be able to read a little bit better. So after that we get the market survey information back, Evergreen then, based upon those findings, slots all of those remaining 300 some odd positions based upon those JAT scores and based upon that level of work that all of those employees respond that they are responsible for. Sorry about that. So they're taking all of that JAT information that produces really a number and helping then slot all of those employees based upon the responses of the market to those 89 positions. That assigned new grade order list then provides us external equity with the other jurisdictions and how we compare with them. And one of the things then we have to do on our side after that information comes back, Evergreen wants to help you provide internal equity as well to make sure that you don't end up with compression type issues, that you, across job classifications within our own organization, people are properly slotted. And so one of the things that they've recommended for us, and you see this in a little bit more detail in the report, is that we want to utilize a range penetration approach such that if you have an employee in particular portion of the way through the range, say they're 60% of the way through their current range today, then when we move them into the new pay scale, we want to move them that same amount through the new range so that if we don't hire, so if we hire somebody tomorrow in that same position, we don't end up with the compression problem we had several years ago where somebody who's been in that position for 6 years is making the same amount as somebody we hire tomorrow. So some of the big conclusions that we were able to make from all of the data that came back from Evergreen is that starting salaries in our current pay structure are very competitive, and that on average, we're above market, we have above market minimums for those positions that were sampled. But as you move through our pay structure and as you move through those ranges, the pay scale becomes less competitive because you'll see that in comparable jurisdictions, they might have a maximum for that same range that's going to be higher. And so we have more of an outcome that you're going to max out more quickly in our current pay structure than you would in other organizations. And then the market survey and slotting of all of the positions shows that very generally we've kept pace with market for positions, or we haven't kept pace with market for positions in our lower pay grades nearly as well as we've kept pace for those at the upper end of our pay scale. And the kind of story I'll relate to that is I was talking with Scott Drachnick a week or two ago, and he was mentioning that amongst manufacturing entities in the county that they have been able to hire and retain employees at some very, very low wages today. And that now they're finding it's harder and harder to be able to keep somebody or hire somebody with the appropriate level of training into those sort of lower paid manufacturing jobs. And so, you know, over the last several years in an economy where it's easy to get cheaper labor because we had so many people in the workplace, now we're finding that as employers are hiring again, it's not as easy to be able to compensate that lower level work at low level wages. And so we have to keep pace in order to make sure that we are competitive in some of those particular pay ranges. So the proposed pay plan broadens the range spread to align more closely with those surrounding jurisdictions so that we have minimums and maximums that are farther apart. You have more ability to stay within that same pay plan but not max out as early. Provides flexibility in those mid-range pay grades for career track promotions. We found that we've got a lot of folks within some of the middle of the pay band where you have employees and supervisors really closely grouped so that those employees have no abilities for promotions because they'll otherwise hit the same pay grade as supervisors or need to exceed if we have career track, if we have a desire to have career tracks. And so one of the things we wanted them to address was that grouping in the middle to give us a little bit more room. And then it creates I already said that. We have a couple of additional pay grades within that same area that as we have more of those pay grades, it allows us to better slot an employee more closely to market when you have more tailored pay grades than you would if you had fewer of them and they're just very, very broad. So this is the proposed pay plan from Evergreen based upon the 2015 data. And so just as a quick reminder for you all and for employees later on, this is not their recommendation for what we decide to do in 2016. This is if we used this pay structure today in 2015 based on 2015 market data, here's the proposed pay plan that they would recommend for us. And so you see the additional pay grades more than we had previously. It starts here at 108. Those additional pay grades at even the lower end of the pay scale, again, are for intermittent positions only, not for full-time, so I don't have those on the chart. The full structure is on the piece of paper that I handed you so that this kind of fits and half legible on the slide. Just that refresher again, this is a point in time of 2015, and so as part of the budget process, we'll want to focus on being able to provide the usual salary increases that we would in some sort of structure, whether it's a COLA and just moving the entire grid forward so that we're not falling behind those market peers, or providing merit increases so that you're moving along within your pay grade. Going forward then, we have a couple of final steps with Evergreen. They'll be updating all of the job descriptions for us and delivering those to Human Resources. They'll provide Human Resources with a manual for plan maintenance procedures to allow us to utilize the tools that they utilize as part of this study to update the information in the next year and following year. And then that job assessment tool is something that will be turned over to us, so we'll have that online ability to collect this type of information from employees in the future as well. On our end, HR will begin meeting with all of the appointing authorities to do a quick double check of all of the grade assignments, just to make sure that that we haven't missed anything in terms of getting employees properly slotted. HR is going to be providing recommendations for positions that weren't included in the Evergreen report. So we've added some positions throughout 2015 since they started back in April. They started with that data set, so HR will have to do some additional slotting for those new positions that were added in 2015. And then they'll need to do a review and recommend any reclassifications as part of the 2016 budget. And then any additional positions added in the 2016 budget, they'll have to provide a recommendation on the new pay grades for those as well. And then the county executive's recommended budget that'll be coming to you the first week in November, that will recommend then what does that 2016 salary structure look like? Are we providing merit increases? Are we providing a COLA, or both? So that's our quick summary of what's included in that 50-page report from Evergreen. I'm sure there are lots of questions, so feel free to, that's what we have for you, so whatever conversation you want to go forward with here, happy to take any questions.
Questions?
Can you explain kind of how this transition works? Like looking at the current schedule and looking at breaking out the 1s, 2s, and 3s, how are those levels decided?
1s, 2s, and 3s, meaning that color
100,
breakdown
200,
that we have?
300 level employee, sorry.
Sure. So they've, I think that's contained in one of the primary sections of the report. They're going to look at that market midpoint. So based upon the information that they have back in the JAT, based upon that market data, they then look at, okay, well, what should be the market midpoint or the compensation for a particular job classification? Let's use a government service rep 1. Which of those pay grades is the closest midpoint to what the recommended salary would be for a government service representative 1? And they'll slot you into that particular pay grade. So it may be that recommended salary was 1% below the midpoint for that particular grade. It may be that it was 2% above midpoint for that particular grade. And so they'll choose the one that's closest and slot you appropriately. Is there further, can you explain that better than what I just did?
No,
I don't think I answered the question.
What they're trying to do is they've got the 89 positions that they went out and studied. They feel what the market midpoint is for those. And so they're then looking in taking our old structure, and you'll see they both start at the same point, and they've spread our old structure out so that we have more possibilities for placing like series of employees or structures to be able to advance employees. They've spread it back out again. Actually, some of you, Dave, I know will remember, CBIZ is the one who told us, take the one we had and compress it. And they're telling us we made a mistake doing that because it caused us problems with our middle level managers and employees not having room for any kind of advancement. So they said spread it back out, and then they're taking that group of employees they've studied and they're saying, when we looked at market midpoint for a proficient employee, what should they be in? What are they in now and what should they be in? So they placed them in the new structure based on those market midpoints. And then they looked at internal equities of complexity of jobs and all those other factors that Jennifer had up there around leadership and all that, and then they slotted those in as well.
It's the same pie, they're just cutting it into 16 pieces instead of 8.
They're cutting it into more pieces, and then they're giving us some advice about the relative complexity of the jobs as well, and how they fell out in the market.
Do the colors stand for any, like, does a 100 level employee represent a certain level as opposed to a 200 and a 300?
Those are our pay bands, and actually the chart that I was able to reproduce on there, we have pay bands of particular color in our codified ordinances as well. We have pay bands A, B, and C. That's going to be a grouping based upon how large the range is, what that midpoint progression is, and then also that breaks down then when we do a reclassification for or a promotion from one grade to another, that dictates what your percentage increase is when you move into that new grade. And
You
if
might
I'm,
move from a 100 level employee to a 200 level employee,
You
so to speak.
Could.
but I think what Jennifer's talking about is, let's say you're in the lower range pay band.
Right.
We give a bigger percentage increase to those folks who are even moving one classification than we do people who are being paid in the upper band. Because they're making less, if you give them 5%, it's a much smaller increase. So traditionally, the ordinance that you all have passed has in bands A and B, which are on that new one would be the blue and the yellow. That's a bigger percentage of increase for getting a promotion in your pay than it would be if you're in the red band.
and Belinda, do those also line up pretty well then with your FLSA classification? Or not perfectly?
Not perfectly, no.
Okay.
How soon will we see where the different positions fall within that?
You've
new
got that,
proposed
so
grades.
It's in the
within the
report.
Evergreen report, on, I think it's section 5, and the chart itself begins on page 5-6, and that's the proposed grade order list. So that lists every position, starting from accountant clerk 2, running through the end of our classification list, which is a wireless, I think,
Yeah.
youth
Dave?
specialist.
Oh,
That lists out what
sorry.
their current
No,
pay grade
you don't.
is and the final pay grade.
Dave, if you look
Find in
at
that report.
I don't have that particular.
Here you go.
It's a big one.
There's a full set of the report right there.
Yeah, it looked
okay.
like Donna
If
put
you
one
can
in each
see that.
position.
Yeah. And then it's at page
Everybody else have one?
Yes.
5-6, it's Exhibit 5C, and it shows you the position, the old grade that it was in under our previous system, or our current system. It shows you the new title recommendation and what they're recommending be the new grade.
Oh, okay. I think one thing I would like to see, and I think from looking at the initial report, where people fall into the pay range based on their years of service, I would think somebody, with 20, 25 years would be close to the top of the pay range, provided they performed at an excellent,
Councilman, that's not necessarily true, because what they're recommending is that since we already addressed compression, that what we do is, let's say that they were a 12 before, and they're gonna be a 208 in the new system. And as an individual, the person who was at 12 was 45% of the way through the system. They're recommending that we return them to 45% of the way through the new pay grade. So, because we already had that compression piece before.
Yeah, I understand that. I think one of the big problems, the years that I worked for the county, is people that had 15, 20 years, there were some people making more money than them that were coming into the system at the same pay grade, but they had 15, 20 years of service.
Right,
And
that's-
I think that's an important thing that we should make sure that those employees that have served the county well should be moving up the scale.
And that's what Joanne's saying, that at that range penetration approach that they've recommended, make sure that since we've addressed compression, we've moved people properly through the portion of their range in today's pay structure. If we move them through that same equivalent portion of the range in the new pay structure, we won't have those issues. As long as we follow that approach, we won't have an employee who's been in the position for 15 years paid the same as someone who starts tomorrow. That's why it's important for us to follow that recommendation for them. If we didn't follow the range penetration model in the Evergreen report, we would end up with the exact same compression problem that we had before. And so we want to avoid that, you're correct.
I don't quite understand how we're going to accomplish that, or if you could show me something where people, based on the number of years where they fall in those pay range, it might be easier for me to understand. Or maybe you could give me some examples, show me some examples of that. I would appreciate it.
Be happy to sit with you and pull a couple of examples of that. And one of the things we've discussed in terms of setting up what is really our compensation plan for going forward, what are we really trying to achieve? The way we've been awarding raises in the time that I've been with the county for 6 years now, you can't answer the question for an employee of, okay, well, how long, if I get hired tomorrow, how long will it take me to get to maximum of the pay range? Because when you're only awarding a 1% raise, because that's all that has been, affordable for the last several years under the way that the market and the world's operating these days, you'd be forever sitting there until you got to the point of maxing out. And the other important thing is that if you're awarding a 1% merit raise and a 1% COLA, you're just simply moving that grid along. Your 1% merit's just moving you along with the grid as well. So, until we can get to a point where we can otherwise afford to be looking at a structure where we say our goal every single year is to move people a portion of their way through the range, such that in every pay band it takes 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever we think that it should be, in order to move someone all the way from the beginning of a pay range to the end, we'll never be able to answer that question, because it doesn't seem as if we've taken an approach to be able to say that that's our goal. We've simply been awarding raises based upon the money available and aiming to be able to give 2-3% raises to get back to where we were under prior years. But under the current structure and current economy, you're not going to be able to answer that question and get there in any type of reasonable time frame.
Dave, make sure I understand your question. You're concerned about people getting paid about the same, doing the same job?
I think it's people that...
People coming in and making as much as somebody's been there a while, but are they coming in doing the same job?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, yeah. Hired in the same grade, same position, and the people that have been there for a while have not advanced very far past them.
Yeah, the only way that could happen would be an advanced starting salary.
Right, I mean...
Advanced starting salaries or reclassification of the position that, people who were already in it before it was reclassed under the previous. But in 13 and 14, that was the process Chuck started.
Right.
In 13 and 14, we took a look at people's time with the county, basically, and awarded them, over the course of those 2 years, almost $8 million, right? To move people based on their years with the county, so that they weren't in that position anymore. So that's what Jennifer's saying, is we can sit down and show you with some representative examples of people who moved as a result of that very study that you're asking about.
Yes, and I think it's very important that somehow performance ought to be tied into that. If you've got an outstanding employee that has served you several years, I mean, that person should be moved along, I think, at a greater rate than somebody who's just performed their job as expected, an average employee.
Well, we're moving towards that. The first thing we had to do was switch the entire evaluation system so it was a more workable evaluation system. And so the last piece of that is being implemented. We need to evaluate it, and then hopefully in 17 we'll be in a position to start using that.
I'm glad to hear that.
And Councilman, I'll add for your specifics where you can reference page 3-16 or section 3.5 is their compression analysis. So they've spent actually several pages and giving you an awful lot of charts to essentially end up telling you, you've done a good job of addressing compression. There doesn't appear to be compression within the current pay structure. And so we just want to make sure that in implementation, we don't do anything that would take us backwards.
Okay, thank you.
I have several things. I actually read this thing last night till my head started hurting. But anyway, it's a complicated document. And one thing I thought right off the bat is I'm looking at that we're going from 18 or 19 pay ranges to 32. And I'm looking at the midpoints and minimums, and this thing isn't revenue neutral, okay? This thing's going to cost the county quite a bit of money. And I was wanting to know, have finance looked at that yet? Okay.
Oh, not only finance, but Jennifer, Don, and I, Belinda, Kathy, Ruth. I mean, we have been, for the past 3 weeks, as estimates have been coming out to us, searching for ways to finance this, because if you notice, and we knew you would read it stem to stern, it said in there, you've got to implement this in a single year if it's really going to give you the best advantage to being able to study in the future marketplace. Because if you don't do it, now as a result of having done the study, then you will fall farther behind when the market begins to move in 16, 17, 18, and all that.
And if you applied, just so that for the general number you can kind of carry in your head if it's helpful, if we applied this pay structure to our 2015 pay structure, we'd be looking at, on average, an employee would see a 6.5% raise in order to move into this pay structure. Now, the higher end of those averages, again, occurs down in those lower pay grades, so pay band A and pay band B see higher end of those averages, so that when you get to the bottom of the pay structure in pay band C, that average percentage goes down quite a bit. But 6.5% is that average raise if we apply simply this structure. And that's not talking yet about the issue of how do we address a COLA or a merit raise.
See, I didn't see it the way you say it, because I'm looking at, for instance, the minimum guy at grade 1, who is now at grade 101, he's getting the same, but you get the upper scales, they're getting a significant increase. Okay, I mean, that's, if you look at it.
If
okay.
you look at
That's
this,
not how it plays out.
if you look at the scales that way, yes, but when you look at then where people are slotted within those scales, you don't see, you're not going to see 50 employees sitting down in that group of pay ranges in 302 to 319 or whatever the top of that grade is. So no, the majority of it you'll see is absolutely paying out at the lower end of the pay scale.
And most of the ones where they found there was no need to change them at all fell in the upper range. There are some people, or some positions, not people, some positions they've said you're already at midpoint at market and you should not be moving these folks.
So
So
what you're saying is, even though the pay grades may reflect a higher figure, okay, the comparable new pay grade, when you plug the personnel in, you're only seeing a 6.5% increase.
average.
Right, average. And then, right, and we also got, I don't know how budget projections are, but cost of living really is pretty flat right now, okay? So this is going to be a pretty big budget impact. The other thing that I guess that I don't know how the current system works, but one thing I didn't see that I really wish I would have saw was some input in terms of exit interviews where we've lost good employees, or where department heads are saying, I mean, I'm getting killed, all my good people are going. And also, how much discretion these folks out in the audience have within their own little organization, because I'm sure all of them have some employees that are really vital, that really get her done, okay? And there's some other folks that don't. So those folks that are, for instance, if they're working for Mr. Shipman and they're getting 32 field assessments done a day versus a guy that gets 5 or 6, in a government setting, it's in a private setting like my own little business, I can reward those folks, but can you do that in yours?
That's the next step, isn't it?
Right, so Mr.
Yeah.
Shipman will be the very first person here in front of you, I know, to be advocating for moving toward pay for performance, wanting to be able to provide, in any given year, that salary increase that we get on the merit side be tied to the performance that you provided in the last year, and that be driving their compensation structure and how quickly you move through that range.
I really like recommendation 5, where it says conduct small-scale surveys, salary surveys as needed, assess the market competitiveness and hard-to-fill classifications and classifications with retention issues and make adjustments. I thought that would be something that the department heads could, possibly do if they're losing people. Maybe they can say, well, I lost so-and-so to City of St. Peters because they're paying X amount more money. And then I don't know how much flexibility some of these folks have. Like, but for instance, Craig and Highway Department, if he needs more guys to shovel asphalt in the hole, can he maybe do that and then buy less dump trucks? Okay, as example, I mean, if the employees are costing more, somewhere along you have to balance the employees versus technology that can make it more
You
efficient.
can't move capital money into operating though. It's prohibited by law, so there's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah.
With regards to recommendation 5 and your question, that's exactly what happens now.
Okay.
And exactly what we need to continue to do in the future, so that if in any given year, a director sees that I've had significant turnover in a particular position, or I had a job posted and it was out there and posted for 9 months, I'm still not getting anyone applying for the job, that's when they make a request to Human Resources to, can you please study this particular position? Do we have it properly classified? Is that the reason I can't keep people because the market is paying more? So that happens now and definitely needs to happen and continue to happen in the future. And one of the nice things that we'll hopefully walk away from with the Evergreen report is we'll have that job assessment tool. It'll help us do a better job of really teasing out what are the requirements of the position, what are the responsibilities and duties of the position, and are we keeping up to date in that job description so that we're properly classifying people into that position.
Any other, John? Go ahead.
So that you won't get sticker shock when you see the cost of this, I've asked them to put together a history of pay increases. And I think we really need to look at this. I want to look at it as what has, figure this into the average for the last 9 years. I mean, those of you who've been here know that we are so dependent on sales tax with 61% of our budget that when times are bad, we can't give raises. And there's several times we did not give raises. Other years we gave very small ones. This one it's going to cost some money, but I think we need to see it as catching up, and that's why we went out to see what other people are paying, pretty much catching up where in some areas we may have fallen behind. And then even after money started coming in, we spent a lot of it on the compression issue, which didn't address these things. So I guess what I would ask you to do when you see the number, looking at in terms of what has been the average over the last 9 years, because some of these raises are going to be quite generous. But that's what the market says we need to do.
John?
You kind of touched on it. What are some of the difficult positions to fill? And what's the reason for that? And like you tried to mention, what we do to compensate for that?
Take corrections nurses.
Corrections nurses are probably near the number one. Corrections has a very particular nursing component in the community that's willing to work in corrections. Their closest competitor is probably the more skilled nursing homes, which are very difficult for people to take emotionally over a long time. It's very difficult to work in corrections. Belinda's people were key in helping Larry adjust even for his external contract. And of course, there aren't really comparables in the community. Nursing homes aren't going to tell us what the going rate is, that they're trying to take people away from us, that are in this immediate community. So, we've had to do quite a bit of looking at that, and that's going to be key for Larry to look at as well when HR comes down. But, we had to look at that. IS people are very difficult for us to hang on to, and we've done a lot of work on that over the last couple of years. But the market right now, if you're a corporation, you're not going to tell us what you're paying. But if they want somebody who's got a certain skill, they'll pay whatever they need to pay to get that skill, because it's key to their business going forward.
And one of the things we've seen in the IS department is that we don't have an ability too much outside of moving into a top management position, that we really can't. If if an employee sees I'm just moving along, I achieved a certain level of work, I can learn something different, I can see a salary benefit because I'm taking on those additional duties, that additional education. They always want to be able to see some progress, and there's some interest in staying with county government. There are benefits to working for county government. And so what we've able to do with that more additional pay grades is provide some of that career track grades available for that type of work, so that you've got an ability to put within your structure a engineer 1, an engineer 2, an engineer 3. And we were very compressed within the ability of those grades to do that previously, because if we created an engineer 3, it would bump into the same pay grade as the manager for that entire team. So this gives us more flexibility to be able to do that.
Another huge problem we have is correctional officers. It's a hard place to work, and it's shift work. Obviously, we're open 7/24. We can't close down for the evening, and Larry has tremendous turnover. He has some people who are loyal to that, who see it as a calling and a vocation, but for a lot of people, it's the last choice of a place to work, and as soon as they get something else in law enforcement, they're out of there. And so we have tremendous problems. I think on average, we've looked, he ends up with 10 positions 1 year and all the way down to about 5 or 6 if HR really works hard on it, that are open continuously all year long, that he just doesn't have access to because of how quickly people come in and go out. So we've looked a lot at those types of jobs. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. The HR folks would probably know quicker than anybody what they see big turnover in, but.
Those are the main ones in terms of turnover. Those are the main positions in terms of turnover. Corrections with our COs is the biggest. You would think that in our truck driver highway department, we would receive a lot of turnover there. We don't. Our administrative positions in terms of clerical are sporadic, but when we go to fill a position, we may receive 60 to 70 applicants, and to have to do an advanced starting salary is more than likely we don't have to do it. But with our nurses, we have to. It's just hard getting them in, and it's hard keeping them because of the work they do. And like they said with the correctional officers, sometimes it's the last hope for a job. And when the economy was so bad, we were hiring like crazy. We had applicants testing and getting hired, and as soon as the economy picked up, they were out the door. We've had 8 to 10 openings to fill at once because of the constant turnover in that position. The other departments is here and there. IS, sometimes we can't even get applicants. We may post a position and get 2 applicants, if that, and that's because of what the private sector is able to pay, because IS drives the profit for so many companies. So it was so difficult even for them to tell us how much they pay certain IT positions, because they know how crucial it is. And if you've heard anything in the news, IS is one of the bigger areas in St. Louis. I mean, St. Louis is like second across the U.S. in terms of IT positions. So our competition is fierce, and it's hard for government to compete.
So I brought this up before. Did this study look at possibility of contract employees and also look at job sharing, where maybe instead of hiring 1 full-time employee to fulfill a job need, we hire 2 part-time employees and they job share that position? I know that's a position by position basis that's going to work, but IS especially, I would think contract would be the way that we would probably have to go for something from that standpoint, but that's going to fall outside of a traditional pay scale, I would assume.
Yeah, and the study does not address that. It only addresses if you hired that part-time employee, what would you pay the part-time employee? If you had somebody full-time, what would you pay the full-time employee? So what we can contract for in terms of that work is not a part of this particular study, but it's something that we are looking at on a regular basis for a variety of projects.
I have a son and daughter in IS. There's a son that's pretty heavy duty into it, and my daughter's in Texas, and I send her all year. And my son works for Boeing right now, but I send him the stuff that I see that comes through for offerings for that. and they chuckle. I hate to say that. I mean, my son especially. I mean, the skill level right now, just in today's paper, it's KPMG, the accounting firm, is hiring, setting a new tech center up. That's going to get tougher and tougher. Because the job market, younger people tend to be the best in those fields. They tend to be more mobile, okay, and they're wanting the money. So it's I don't know how that problem is going to get resolved. One thing I guess that it'd be an opportunity to say something to these folks out here that, we embarked on this to try to make your jobs easier, not tougher, okay? And if there's stuff that's contained in here that's going to create your heartburn, you're more than free to say something now or to send us an email regarding it, okay? I just wanted to make sure that our intention is not to make it more difficult, but to maybe help you keep and retain the best employees you can get within your budget. So that being said, if anybody here has any comments regarding this, it'd be a good opportunity to do it, or
Well, let me just mention before you ask the department heads for any comments they would have, and by the way, they haven't had a chance to read this yet. They're getting it today.
good luck.
So, but,
explains why they're all here.
exactly. But Jennifer sent a message to all of them so that they had the opportunity to be here if they wanted to be. One of the things that you said, I just want to make sure you understand. We didn't ask Evergreen or give Evergreen any information to say, we're more concerned about paying our IS people as opposed to our truck driver laborers or our animal control officers. We asked them to go into the market and figure out the market jobs and then to look at internal equity between the complexity and leadership and the other items that they were looking at in the jobs. So that's what they looked at. So if you have feedback that says, your IT jobs, you're not nearly going high enough to be out there in the kind of market I think you should be at. They looked at what the market was, and they came back with those recommendations. We haven't said, well, we only care about IT. That's a heavy-duty one. It is a heavy-duty one for us. It helps drive the government. Or we only care about corrections. We told them, look at the whole schmear and bring back equal recommendations for where you believe people belong based on that.
But when the rubber hits the road, it's not what these folks say, it's what Simon and Belinda tell us.
And that's why the
Yeah.
next step is to go out and say, this is what they're recommending, where that job slots in, what's your feedback?
Will there be, I'm sure there will be feedback between you folks and like Simon regarding, how do we attract more IT professionals, or Mr. Crawford regarding corrections. That's going to be an ongoing thing.
We've already had those discussions for over a year.
And the only, and I'm sorry, but this is my last question. The only thing, I see a little bit of a public knee-jerk on this where they're saying, oh, the county salaries are going up on average 6.5%, and our salaries aren't increasing at all because the cost of living is relatively flat. Is there an opportunity maybe to phase this in over a couple of years instead of doing this all 1 year? Okay, 3.25%, 2 years in a row looks a lot better to the general public and in general than 6% at one shot hit. Just my comment. I don't know if you all feel that way or not.
No, I don't feel that way at all. I think we've fallen behind and we need to catch up. And I can tell you from somebody that's worked, pardon me, for numerous government agencies over the years that I was working for local government, the organizations that were successful were because of the dedication and the employees they had. The ones that weren't, they didn't take care of their employees, and the employees developed an attitude, why should I work any harder, or why should I do any better if I'm not going to be rewarded for it? And I think it's very important. The biggest asset that this county has is its employees, the most important asset, because they're the ones on the front line in front of the public, and it's important that we maintain that excellent level of employees so that the St. Charles County continues to reflect that professionalism.
Anything else?
We feel confident we can afford this?
We will tell you right now, we've done everything we can to make this so that we can bring it forward to you fully funded.
And the plan is 2016, this goes into effect?
That's what we're aiming for.
Say again?
That's what we're aiming for, yes.
Cool.
Right.
Just want to make sure everybody's on the same
And
page.
so, I mean, we're working to fund the whole thing. They've recommended some jobs need to be reclassified, some jobs aren't where they should be in the market, and some jobs, some jobs aren't getting anything as a result of market or reclass. But nobody will lose anything, because I know that's a question that's going to be out there. So even if they came back in and said your widget job is above market right now in the marketplace at the midpoint, we aren't looking at taking any money away from any employee. So the only thing they'd benefit by is whatever COLA or merit raise that we recommend and you all approve. But we're not looking at taking any money away from anybody.
What happens if we have flat inflation, which we're almost at right now, okay? And what happens if we continue with some stagnation and sales tax revenues go, we not adopt this and 6.5% bump up in salary, and then sales tax revenue does one of these? I'm going to say, would you please consider that possibility as well, because, I don't, what's the contingency when that happens? So,
John has a contingency for that.
yeah. Yes, we know about that.
It's in our pocket.
And I agree with John on that one, so, okay.
One last comment I'd like to make. When I was a private citizen and first came to the county, one of the most things I was impressed with was our county employees. The structure and the dedication, and I still try to emphasize that to everybody I can, because, as a private citizen, you just don't know what's going on in government. You don't really understand it. You don't know the people who are working for it, but I was truly impressed, and I still am today.
Anything else?
I'd like to just interject something. I've been with the county for over 30 years, and I've watched some changes. And I think Mr. Elam has a point that we need to maybe think more about with regard to employees, traditional employees, full-time, whatever, and then maybe offering or heading in a direction of changing that a little bit. Because traditionally, when I came to work for the county and for many years, employees came here and stayed here because of benefits, not just your insurance and all those benefits, but those for sure, and other benefits of stability. In the 30 years that I've been here, we've downsized once. Had to reduce the number of employees we had. Other than that, it's traditionally very stable with work. People like to, it's Monday through Friday for the most part, 8 to 5. I mean, people look at working for the county as a benefit. And the younger generation now does not have that mindset. Under 40, they will change careers, they will change jobs within a career numerous times over their lifetime of work. Whereas in my generation, and I'm not telling you how old I am, but my generation, you would get a job when you were young, you would work hard at it, you felt like you were a part of the business or the company or whatever, and you were loyal to them until you retired. The rising generation now does not have that mindset, and they will change jobs to get more money or to do something different or whatever. So we need to be maybe looking at other, this compensation study is important and a good point for us to be at right now, but we need to, for the future, we need to be looking at this differently so that we can utilize that workforce that's coming up. They're not going to stay with us for a career, a lifetime career.
Councilman Elam's got some comments about that.
I want to just piggyback on that real quick. I think it's also not just the younger generation, but I think it's also looking at baby boomers who are retiring. One of the things I've talked to Jennifer about is institutional knowledge. When you lose an employee who's been here for 30 years or more, and they walk out the door and you replace them with someone who is 22 years old, God love a 22-year-old. I know they're going to be cheaper to hire than the person who was here before, but we lose 30 years of knowledge of how this department works. And then you have this whole thing of, I've got to bring you up to speed. So what I've been trying to encourage, and I would love to hear from department heads from time to time, will a job share type position work for an employee who wants to retire, but they would still like to work 2 days a week, 3 days a week? So could I have a 22-year-old work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and could I have a employee work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Maybe they job share there on Wednesday and hand off the job duties. But that way I have institutional knowledge that I'm passing on to the new employee that's there. I have an automatic backup where if this person's going to be out of town, then maybe the other person can work that Thursday and Friday. If the other person's going to be out of town, that person can work the Monday and Tuesday. My vacation's covered. It saves us from a standpoint of that benefit package. They don't necessarily need nor want the benefits. Like my wife is a hairstylist. She doesn't have benefits at being a hairstylist. She gets them from me. But not to say that she works part-time. Just for the record, I didn't say she worked part-time.
Yeah, you're being recorded.
I want to pay for that when it's on tape. She works hard full-time, but not everybody needs a benefits package, but that job share type position would work well in that scenario. So if we could put something like that together, would it make our office more efficient? You know, are there ways for, I was just talking to Scott this morning, are there ways for us in our departments to embrace technology to make it work better? I mean, I love all the stuff that we've done where you can get all kinds of your information online, your tax information you can get online. We're doing more and more of that, and I would like to see a lot more of that continue. But what works, you know, is being more flexible a better strategy to look at some positions? And I don't know that. You guys do. I mean, they're your employees, they're your positions.
We have many departments that have structured the first part of what you've said. They've had somebody long-standing who's coming in, retiring. They have asked them if they would work part-time. They've structured the job so that that person's coming back part-time and they're putting a person in to train. So HR works all the time with departments wanting to do that, with you know, moving people that, you know, there's an initial desire for a job. We have a lot of seasonal employment on intermittent, but we also have departments who come forward and say, hey, we think we need to do X, or we're getting these new duties. We'll give them intermittent money initially to see if it's a permanent part-time position or if flexibility helps them. A lot of times with those, the departments come back and say, we can't really hire good candidates unless this is going to be full-time.
Right.
But, you know, we try to work with them that way.
I'm just saying.
Right.
And transition planning is important. It's not as if that baby boomer retiring tomorrow is a surprise. You know, you should be working and focusing on who are the employees who internally would potentially be able to step in as a promotion, and doing some of that knowledge transfer long ahead of the day that they decide to retire.
I guarantee if you took a poll of employees that have been here for 25, 30 years or even greater, the reason they haven't retired is because they can't afford to. And I think you would find that to be the biggest reason for a lot of employees is
We know one that did find a way to retire.
after more than 30 years, I was ready.
I do agree with what she said, though. I have a 23-year-old, a 25, and a 27. And the things that we looked for when we were that age, the steadiness, that's not what they look for. My 23-year-old one, since graduation from college, is on a second job. My 25 years old is on a third job. And they've moved up the ladder, but they don't care about the work from home is a big thing with them. They work on their own schedules. My daughter, I was in Dallas 2 days ago visiting her, and I said, when do you need to go to work? She says, my boss is fine as long as I get what I need to get done. And I know that's really hard to do in a government setting, but that's the mindset a lot of young people want to stay in. We're going to be competitive and get the best and the brightest young folks. You guys are going to have to figure out how to make that happen. I don't know. That's going to be a tough one. Anything else?
I'm good.
Anything
Thanks
else?
very much.
thank you all for coming, and please read the report and make sure you got Visine. So, thank you.